So, what house system to use in astrology? So, that's the big debate among astrologers is what is the right or the best house system to use? So, I wanted to create this video just to offer my perspective. And my overall perspective is it depends. It depends on you. And that's what I like to tell people when people ask me, they're like, well, what house system do you use? And why. And so for me, I use the Porphyry house system. It's the house system that is used in the School of Evolutionary Astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green. And the reason why I use it is because it resonates deeply with me in my own chart when I learned evolutionary astrology, and it's been spot on and extremely helpful for the clients that have come to me. So that's the one that I use. Now, it's not exclusive, and I don't always just rely on Porphyry. I do use some other house systems and peek at what those have to show me as well. So, in this video, I wanted to go through the four main ones that I use, and I think these four are the main house systems that are used today by most astrologers. And so, with that, I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm going to actually share the CoStar website because I think they do a pretty good job of illustrating and explaining these house systems. And so this is the CoStar website, and I will link it in the description below. So this is an astrology application that you can download on your phone, and it'll give you interpretations, it'll give you transits, it'll give you a bunch of information. I don't personally use it. I think I've downloaded it once, used it for a little bit, and I don't use it anymore. But I really like the way that they describe the house systems on their website. So their default house system is Porphyry. So what is the Porphyry house system in a nutshell? And so Porphyry divides the 12 houses in astrology up according to space, and it prioritizes the angles of the chart. So if you watched my video on the anatomy of a chart, I went over the four main angles of a chart, which is the ascendant, the MC, the top of the chart, the descendant where the sun sets, and then the IC or the bottom of the chart. And those are the four main points. And so this Porphyry house system, the way it is calculated is it takes the ascendant at the place where you were born, takes the zodiac sign and the degree on the ascendant, and it takes the highest point in the sky, and it calculates and it divides by 3 the space between the two of them. So as you see this graphic displaying on my screen, it's showing you the horizon line, the highest point in the sky, and 33%, right, is how it divides these sections or energies in the sky. And so this house system prioritizes the angles. It calculates it off the angles, and it's using the space in between and dividing it equally. And so, like I said, this is the one that I use in practice. And this one has resonated with me in my own chart and has certainly been the one that has been the most effective in my astrology practice. The next one is whole signs. And so this one was introduced to me. So my first foray, I guess, into astrology was I learned Hellenistic astrology from Chris Brennan, and this was the house system that was used. And so whole sign is the oldest known house system. As it says here, it's about 2,100 years old. And simply this house system takes, again, that sign on the ascendant where the sun rises in the location where you were born. Whatever sign is there, it uses that as your first house. So like in the example I used in the anatomy of your horoscope, the sign of Leo was on the ascendant. And so Leo would represent the energy of your first house. And then the second house would go to Virgo, if I get these right in my head. And then the third house would be Libra. And then the fourth house would be Scorpio, right? And so on and so forth. And so it would assign a zodiac sign per house. So in this one, and we're going to look at this a little more. I have another screen where we talked about the angles, the ascendant and the midheaven, which is the highest point in the sky. These, where it's prioritized in Porphyry in the whole system, the MC and the ascendant can fall somewhere in the first house, can be even in the 12th house, I believe. The highest point in the sky can migrate between the 9th and the 10th house on the top of the chart. So it's not prioritizing those angles. Now, this house system, I watched a video, and I think it was an interview with Chris Brennan where he talked about a little bit about the whole sign house system and why he values it. Well, it's the one that was used foundationally all the way back from the earliest documented teachings of astrology, right? So it's foundational. But not only that, he mentioned a good point that just test it out when you're looking at your transits, right? So transits are, if you looked at your natal chart, the energies and the symbols that were in the sky at the time you took your first breath, transits compare the way the planets and symbols are situated now to your natal chart. So just using an example, in current times, Saturn recently changed signs into Pisces, and Pluto recently changed signs into Aquarius. Although Pluto is going to be backing out back into a Capricorn, it's actually retrograde now. But the concept is when you see a planet change signs, where is it affecting you in your life, right? So an example that I am using now is in my chart, in my third house, in my fourth house, I have Pisces that's in part of my third house, and Pisces covers part of my fourth house in the Porphyry house system. If I was to use whole signs, Pisces would just be my fourth house. So with the example of Saturn going into Pisces, well, is that affecting the third house, which would be tied to communication, tied to writing and to learning? Or is it affecting more of my home life, right? And my foundation, right? So test whole signs in transit is kind of the guidance that Chris Brennan gave, and that it's resonating with me that, yeah, when Saturn moved into Pisces, there started to be some shifts with my home and my foundation, right? So from a transit standpoint, I will dip into the whole signs version of it. I won't necessarily change the whole signs in my software program, but I will take notice when a planet changes to a different zodiac sign. And I'll look at it in the chart and be like, okay, well, it's showing as it's still in the third house in your chart using my example, but it's probably impacting your fourth house, right? Because Pisces would go into your fourth house. And so you may see some changes there. So I feel that whole signs is valuable from that perspective. But going back to my original statement, it's up to you. Play with this, right? And that's what I tell people that ask me what my preference is and why I have that preference. I always end after I tell them what my preference is, I always say, try it. Cast your horoscope in different house systems and feel into it. What feels right for you? Once you start to learn what the houses mean, what the symbols mean, then feel into it for yourself and rest on whichever one feels right for you. Because with astrology, it's not an exact science, it's energy, right? And so the energies are fluid. When you look at a house cusp, it's not definite. It's not like here's the border and these energies will never blend with one another. That's not how I look at it. And so that's whole signs. And the other thing to note here with whole signs is each one of the houses are 30 degrees, right? Where if you have Porphyry and Placidus, the energy bands of those houses will be modified. They'll be different sizes. They won't always be 30 degrees. They'll be 30 degrees or less. And so that's one of the other differences with whole sign is each house will be 30 degrees and it will be a specific zodiac sign. And then the next one displayed here is Placidus, and this one is probably the most heavily used in astrology circles. Placidus is usually the default. If you go to different websites to cast your horoscope, Placidus will be the default. And so this one, different from Porphyry, it uses a time-based system. So again, if we started at the ascendant, right, in that example that I used with Leo on the ascendant, and whatever degree Leo was at on the ascendant, it would start marking the house cusps according to where that degree falls every 2 hours. So every cusp would be marked every 2 hours. And so we're gonna take a look at this one in another view, but these house divisions are going to be very close to Porphyry. Whether you use space-based like Porphyry or time-based, which is Placidus, you'll notice if you play with those and you change those in your own chart, a lot of times there won't be any changes. There'll be very subtle changes, but for the most part, your symbols and your planets and luminaries will more than likely stay in the same houses between the two systems. Now, the drawback with using Placidus is in the higher or lower elevations. So if you go beyond 66 degrees north latitude or below 66 degrees south latitude, this is not usable because the horizon in those extremes, in those extreme places on the planet, the horizon isn't even visible. So this would not be usable. So then it would be, the whole signs house system would be something that could be used there. And it says it right here. So latitudes greater than 66 degrees north or 66 degrees south, this would not be a good house system to use. And so I want to drop into another screen to kind of compare them. Okay, well, what does it look like? What does a chart look like between these house systems? And so here is a comparison between the Placidus house system and the Porphyry house system. And so on the left-hand side is Placidus, and this is the example chart that I used in the anatomy of your natal chart. So it's the same chart, it's just two different house systems. So if you see on the left is Placidus, this is the time-based system. And so if you look to the left where you see the sign of Leo at 20 degrees and 37 minutes, that's the ascendant, right? So in the Placidus system, it takes a 2 hour mark, right? So it's time-based, and then it sets the cusp of the 12th house. So if you look at that Leo sign on the left and you go up to the cusp of the 12th house, you'll see the sign of Cancer, and it's at 21 degrees 46 minutes, right? So it marks that as the 12th house. Then in 2 hours, it will mark the 11th house cusp, which if you go up from there, you see the sign of Gemini at 17 degrees 10 minutes. And it'll keep going all the way through the cusp of the 7th house. And then it will define the house boundaries for those 7 houses. And then the houses below those, the opposing houses, those borders are defined by those 7 on the top, which makes up the 12 houses in that house system. And so that's how the energies are divided there. On the right-hand side of the screen is Porphyry, which is the one that I use, which is the space-based house system. And so again, if you look to the left on that image on the right, you see Leo at the same degree, 20 degrees, 37 minutes. But in this one, it's space-based. So it's taking that Leo at 20 degrees, 37 minutes, and it's taking at the top of the chart the sign of Taurus at 10 degrees, 1 minute. It's taking those angles and then it's taking the space between the two of them and it's dividing by 3. So if you look at the 12th house, the 11th house, and the 10th house, they're all about equal size. They're all about 33%, right? And so when those get calculated, then the opposing houses, the the fourth house, the fifth house, and the sixth house are defined from those, right? And then if you take the space on the other side between the descendant and the MC, the ninth, eighth, and the seventh house, those are divided up equally, 33%. They create those three houses, which those borders get extended down to the first, second, and the third house. So that is how the houses are divided in the Porphyry house system. So if you look at these two side by side and you look at the symbols in these charts and you look at the house placements of those symbols, they are the same. There is no change other than, I just caught this now, if you look at the moon, which is on the bottom of the screen, in the Placidus house system, the moon is on the fourth house, is in the fourth house, close to the cusp of the fifth house. If you look on the right-hand screen, the Porphyry house system, the moon is in the fifth house, close to the border of the fourth house, right? So this is one of those scenarios where I would be like, okay, intuitively, where do I feel like this moon should be for this person, right? So since this isn't a person, this is just casting a chart for a certain time here in Portland, Oregon. If this was an individual that was looking at their own chart, feel into it. Placidus, Porphyry, do you feel like your moon is in the fifth house where there's creativity, there's fun, there's joy, there's involvement with children, and it's in a Sagittarius kind of way? Or do you feel more of the fourth house where you feel like you're most comfortable at home, right? Or you like to maybe travel a lot and your home is more, instead of having a home where you stay there for 25 or 30 years, Sagittarius in the fourth house can be indicative of traveling a lot. So it's like somebody might say, well, wow, when I was a child, it's like my family used to be mobile, right? I remember being in an RV for 2 years at a time, right? And traveling around. It's like, oh, well, that sounds like your moon energy may be more in the fourth house, right? But maybe while you were traveling around in your RV, your family did a lot of creative things and maybe they were artists, right? And maybe in the different places they visited, they did some events for children, right? So you can say, okay, well, I'm feeling into this and there's a blending of the fourth and the fifth house with my moon, right? So since the moon is close to that border, you can be feeling a blend of those energies, maybe one more than the other. And so that could help you define which house system resonates most with you. Right. And so we have these two. And now let's look at, I'm going to drop this screen and then we're going to pull up whole signs and equal. And we're going to see how this changes. Okay, so here's the comparison between whole signs and equals. So this is the same chart. I just changed the house system. So on the left-hand side, you're looking at a whole signs representation of the same chart. And so in this one, if you look to the left on this chart, you see the sign of Leo, but you see it's at 0 degrees, right? So in the other chart, it was at 20 degrees, 37 minutes in both Porphyry and Placidus. Well, in this one, it's at 0 degrees, right? Because whole signs just says what sign is on the ascendant at the place you were born. So it takes Leo and it says, okay, well, Leo, that's the first house. And then the second house cusp is Virgo. And the third house cusp is Libra. And we go around the wheel and we define each house according to that zodiac sign. And so what I mentioned when we were reviewing the CoStar site is that you'll notice in that first house on that screen on the left, you'll see an AS in the first house. That is the ascendant, right? So you see AS and next to it is 20 degrees, 37 minutes, right? So that is the ascendant. So with whole signs, the ascendant isn't exactly at the ascendant position, it falls in the first house. right? So that's the difference with whole signs. It does not prioritize the houses, it prioritizes the zodiac signs. And so if you look at the top of the chart, you'll see in that 10th house, there's an MC up there. And so that would be representative of noon, the MC, the top of the sky, right? So it's no longer where that arrow is at the top of the chart that's pointing to the sign of Taurus. It's now in the 10th house. So depending on where you were born, that MC will float. It can be in the 10th house, it can be in the 9th house. And so again, it does not prioritize that angle. You'll also notice in this whole signs now that it's taking a zodiac sign per house, it's moved some of these symbols. So the Porphyry and the Placidus house system, the sign of Mercury, the North Node, and Jupiter were all in the 9th house at the top of the chart. In whole signs, that North Node and Mercury have moved into the 10th house. And so now you have the North Node of the moon, Mercury, the MC, the sun, and Uranus all in the 10th house. And so things are shifting, right? And you see the sign of Venus on that left-hand side in the 12th house was in the 11th house in Porphyry and Placidus. It's now shifted to the 12th house. You'll see the south node of the moon down there in the 4th house in the sign of Scorpio has now shifted from the 3rd house to the 4th house. And so whole signs will definitely, if you're comparing it to Porphyry and Placidus, will definitely shift the symbols into different houses. So this is one that, again, experiment with it. How does it feel? Especially once you learn the houses, what they mean, what the symbols mean, you can lean into it for yourself. Like I said, me personally, Porphyry and the way that I read a chart from an evolutionary astrology perspective is spot on for the type of astrology that I do. But whole signs still holds value, and you may wind up looking at your chart in whole signs and being, yeah, this resonates with me. That's great. If it resonates with you, that's the most important thing. And then this last one that I was covering is equal houses, which is similar to whole signs, but in the equal house system, it does take into account that ascendant and the degree the ascendant is at. So if you look on this right-hand chart, on the ascendant, where the sign of Leo is, it's at 20 degrees, 37 minutes, right? So it takes that degree marker and it says, okay, we're going to create the houses from there. So if you look at the cusp of the 2nd house with the sign of Virgo, 20 degrees, 37 minutes. You look at the 3rd house, you have 20 degrees, 37 minutes with the sign of Scorpio, and so on and so forth. And so there is a blending of the zodiac signs in the houses. In this example, you're going to have Leo starting the 1st house, but it's going to be blending with Virgo, right? And the 2nd house is going to start with Virgo, but it's going to blend with Scorpio, right? Which is the differentiator between equal and whole signs. And in this chart, you see, again, you have the ascendant is clearly marked, right? So the ascendant is the starting point, 20 degrees, 37 minutes. But you'll notice the MC is listed up there at the top. So the MC in the equal house system will float as well. And so the MC in equal houses is in the 9th house, which if you look on the left chart in the whole signs is in the 10th house, right? So that shifts the MC and it's shifting all of those planetary bodies and symbols into the 9th house in equal house. And it takes Venus in the 11th, it takes Venus from the 12th house and moves it to the 11th. It takes Pluto from the 7th house and moves it to the 6th. So you see these energies, these symbols get moved around. And so again, these are just 4 examples. These are the ones that I use the most. I don't really use equal house. It's more whole signs, Placidus, and Porphyry. But I'd say these are the 4 most heavily used. There's plenty of others out there. So if you are curious, you can look the other ones up, understand how the energies are drawn, how the houses are done, and you can feel into it for yourself. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for checking this out, and I will see you again in another video. Thanks.